Hey, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to continue the series on Japanese candlestick charting techniques. In the previous video, we downloaded some historical data for the S&P 500, and we used Python combined with TA-Lib to scan historical data for the S&P 500 to determine when particular candlestick patterns from this book occurred. So we looked briefly at the Morningstar pattern and the bullish engulfing pattern and noted where they showed up in this year's S&P 500 chart. Now in this video, what I want to do is expand that further and spend a little bit more time coding now that we have the background out of the way. I'm going to show you how to build this technical scanner that I have here on the screen. And so I'm going to show you how to build this screener with only about 100 lines of code. And so let's look at what it does first. Here's the technical scanner, and it's a web app. It's written in Python using the Flask framework, so it's a micro framework for Python, and it lets us easily create a web application, and we're going to create the templates for both the front end, and we're going to create the Python code for the back end. And what it's going to let us do is list all of the different candlestick patterns that are available in TA-Lib, and we're going to list them all in this drop down here. And then we're going to click scan, and what that's going to do is scan through all of our data sets for the S&P 500 and determine if this particular pattern has appeared for a particular stock as of the close on July 31st, 2020, which is the most recent day. And so let's show a quick example. So let's say I want to find this dragonfly doji pattern. You might not even know what that is, but I'm going to scan for it. And this will just scan for us, and it will pull up the charts from FinViz, and it'll also go through and get us all the symbols and companies and give us whether that's a bullish or bearish signal. And then I can also do, for instance, engulfing patterns, and this is going to pull up all of the bullish and bearish engulfing patterns that occurred on July 31st by analyzing data sets that we have downloaded locally, programmatically using YFinance. And so here you can see my list of engulfing patterns, and if I scroll down, you can see some examples. So it's marked bullish if it's a bullish engulfing pattern. So you can see an example there. And let's see an example of a bearish engulfing pattern. You see booking here, and that probably makes sense, right? Travel is down. So there's a bearish engulfing pattern here. And this looks like it's a possible bearish idea for next week. And if we scroll down further, you can kind of just confirm that this is working as intended. Let's see, what's another good example? Ford is bearish, hasn't been doing very well. Intel has obviously been under a lot of pressure, so that's another possibly a good bearish idea since they lost business with Apple, and also AMD has been doing very well lately. And so this is just a quick scanner to let you easily find technical setups. And not only can you do candlestick patterns, we can add front end and back end components for any technical indicators we're interested in scanning for. So as a viewer mentioned, he doesn't think these candlestick patterns are very useful on their own, but you could maybe combine it with some other indicators in order to provide a more powerful signal. And so you could add any of the other indicators in the TA-Lib library to this and hook it up and maybe scan for a combination of several indicators in order to create a more powerful signal. So that's what we're building, and I'm going to show you how to build it from scratch. And I've determined that we can do this in about 100 lines of code. And just for proof, this is the final result. So I did this already, and you see we have exactly 50 lines of Python code on the back end for our routes, and we have 50 lines of front-end HTML code that form this template. Obviously, we didn't write TA-Lib, so that's additional code, and we're piggybacking on FinViz in order to build these charts, but we know how to build charts ourselves because we've done that in other videos. But I wanted to show you how to quickly make a useful utility from scratch, a full stack web application. And so let's go ahead and get started with that now. As usual, I've fired up Visual Studio Code, and I've created a new folder. There are no files in it yet. And I'm going to create a new file called requirements.txt. I'm working out of a folder called candlestick-screener. You can call your folder whatever you want. In requirements.txt, I'm going to put the name of the Python packages that we're going to be using in this tutorial. And so I'm going to be using Flask, which is a Python framework. I'm going to use TA-Lib, which we used in the previous video. And we're going to use pandas and YFinance. So now that we have those, I'm going to create a new file called app.py, and that's going to contain the code for our Flask application. So I'm going to hit the play button real quick just so it fires up, and you see we have a virtual environment, and this program doesn't do anything yet. So the first thing I'm going to do is install the requirements. So I'm going to do pip -r install requirements.txt, and I am going to do pip 3 install -r requirements text, right? And it installs those dependencies in my virtual environment. So now I have Flask installed, I have Y-Finance available, and TA-Lib. So what are we going to do next? Let's just look at Flask, which is a micro framework. And this lets us easily make web applications in Python. And if you go to the user guide real quick here, there should be like a hello world example. And so let's see what it looks like. This is the complete documentation. And there should be a quick start. Yeah, so let's do the quick start guide here. And let's just copy this guy and talk about what it does. All right, so from Flask, import Flask. So we're importing Flask, the class here. And we're creating a new application of type Flask, so app equals Flask. And then once that's done, all we need to do is define some regular Python functions, and then we decorate them with these function decorators. And those let us define routes on the web that map to this function. And so just to show you what that looks like, I can type Flask run now, right? And then it'll run this web application. And so if I go to this on the web, you'll see at localhost or 127.0.0.1 :5000. If I go to the slash route, it'll return hello world just like that. So it executes my Python application, right? And so if I wanted another route, I can do app.route, and I'm going to call this one snapshot. And so if I go to /snapshot, it'll call this function called snapshot. And I'll just say return, and I'm just going to return a Python dictionary with a code of success, and this will become JSON data on the web. So if I go to /snapshot now, you'll see it didn't find it yet, right? And that's because it doesn't reload the application automatically unless I put debug mode on. And so I'm going to do one more step here. I'm going to stop that, and let's see, we have debug mode. And so I need to put this export Flask env equals development. So I'm going to put it in development mode so that we can see all this debugging information on the screen. And when you go to production, you turn debug mode off, and that way it doesn't put any error messages or anything on the screen. Okay, and so that's done. So now I can do Flask run, and now if I make any changes, it should reload the application. So now I went to /snapshot. Since this says /snapshot, it'll call this function, and I can return the code success. If I change this, it should reload automatically, and you see I took out one S. And so we have a basic web application running already. So now all we have to do is fill this in with what we need for our web application. So let's go ahead and get going with that. So let's make a basic front end for our application using HTML. So to do that, we're going to create a new folder called templates. So Flask looks for HTML templates, or Jinja 2 templates is the templating engine it uses. And so it looks in a folder called templates by default. And so I'm going to create a new template called index.html. And in here, let's just put the basics of an HTML page. So there's my HTML tags. Let's give it a body. Let's give it a head, right? And yeah, and I'll give it an h1 tag, call it technical screener. Or let's call it candlestick screener. Right? And then stuff goes here. All right. So now if I go back to my index, you still see it says hello world still, right? Because we didn't tell it that this was the template to use. So I'm going to go back to app.py. Instead of returning the string hello world, what we need to do is tell it to render that template, or to use that template. And so there's a function in Flask called render template. So we're going to import render template from Flask. And instead of returning hello world, I'm going to return render template. And then I'm going to give it a string, which is the name of the template, index.html. And just like that, now you see candlestick screener and stuff goes here. Next step, let's add a little bit of style. So I'm going to go to index.html. In my head, let's just put style. Let's just throw a style tag. You can separate this out into a separate style sheet, but we're going to only have like 3 styles, so I'm just going to put it right here. And so I'm going to say font, or for the body, I'm going to say font family Arial, just to give it a little style. There you go. Okay. And then I'll give it a margin of 20 pixels. Okay, cool. So we have a template, we have a basic web application, and now we just need to fill it in. So the first thing we want to do from our example, we wanted a drop down. So I'm going to make a select, and then I'm going to put that inside of a form. So we just need a form, and then we need a drop down inside of it. So a select tag makes a drop down, and then we just need some options for our drop down. So it might say something like doji, and then it might say engulfing, and so forth, right? So I'm going to do option, and then engulfing, and then we want a button. So I'm going to do input type equals submit, and then we'll say value equals scan. If I do that, you'll see we have a drop down with doji and engulfing, and then we have a button that says scan, right? It doesn't do anything yet. So what else do we need? Let's give it a name. So the select needs a name, and we're going to call it pattern. And then we give these values. So value equals doji. And I'm just hard coding these now, and then we'll make it dynamic shortly. So let's see if this works. We're prototyping it out. I click scan. And for this input button to actually submit the form, it actually needs to be nested inside of this form tag. So I'm going to put it there, refresh it, and now it's part of the form. And now if I click scan, you'll see it says question pattern equals doji. And if I click engulfing, it says pattern equals engulfing. So we have a form that's submitting, and it's specifying a type of candlestick. And so what we're going to want to do is run that type of candlestick pattern against our data set and mark it as true if that candlestick pattern appears in our data set. So next step, let's go ahead and make this dynamic here. So what we need to do is pass some variables to this template from our Python code. And so I'm going to create one more file, and I'm going to call it patterns.py. And what we want to do is provide some type of list of all of our candlestick patterns so that we can display them in the template. And so where can we get that list? So I'm going to go to TA-Lib Python. And if you look in the documentation here, it'll give us some examples. So let's see, using the functions API, pattern recognition. I believe there's a list here somewhere. There you go. So there's a list here of all of the different candlestick patterns. So we could use all these indicators and make those part of our technical screener as well. But since this series is focused on pattern recognition, we're going to use these patterns. So I have this list. So rather than typing them all out, I'm going to copy that list to our file. So I'm just going to create a separate file with some constant values. And so there you go. We have a list of names. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to format this to make it look like a dictionary, or to make it into a dictionary. And so I want it to look like this, colon, quotation mark. Basically, we want it to look like this, where there's like a key and then a value, just like that, and then a comma. And then if we do it like that, then we can use this and pass it to our select dropdown and just loop through all of these and display those in the dropdown list. And so how do I process this text? I'm going to do a find and replace. So you can go to replace here. And I'm going to use regular expressions. So I'm going to click this button here, the dot star. You can do this however you want. I just don't want to manually go through all these different candlestick patterns, and it'll be much faster to do it this way. And you can even just copy this out of the repository if you want to later. I'm going to commit it to GitHub. So so basically this, we want to find one or more spaces. So if I do this bracket with a space in it, it'll find all of the spaces in the file. And we're going to want to replace those with like a quotation mark and colon and so forth. So I don't want to include these single spaces between the words. I just want this part. So I'm going to do curly brace and then 2 comma like that, and I'll find 2 or more spaces just like that. And what do I want to replace that with? I want to replace it with a quotation mark, a colon, and another quotation mark. If I do that, you'll see this is starting to form the key values, you know. So we're going to have another quote. So I want another quote at the end and another comma. So let's go ahead and look for the carriage return, which would be \n, and that'll find the end of our lines. And then I want to replace that with a quotation mark and a comma. And then we want another carriage return and another quotation mark on the next line. And let me try that. And look at that. So now we have a key and a value and going all the way. And let's just finish this up with, we can just manually do the rest of this part. So I'm going to do that. And we'll just have this list of keys and values. So I'll do patterns equals, and we'll make it a dictionary. And we just have a bunch of keys and values. So there you go. Nicely done. I like that. So now we can import this into our app. And don't worry so much if you didn't follow along there. You can just copy it in however you want. You can use the GitHub repository later. So I'm going to do that. And then what I'll do is just import the patterns.py. So I'm going to do from patterns, import patterns. And let's just see if we can pass those patterns to our template. So this will show us how to do that in Flask. We can send a variable to our HTML template by giving it a name. And so we're saying it's going to be called patterns in the template, and we're passing a variable called patterns to the template. And so now if I put in curly braces here after the form, let's just do patterns, and let's see if it just dumps it on the screen. So I'm going to go back here. Oops, that's the example. All right, so there it is. So we can dump that dictionary onto the screen, which is good. So now instead of just dumping on the screen, we're going to populate the dropdown with it. And so let's populate the dropdown. So I'm going to do for pattern in patterns. And this syntax is used by Jinja 2, and it just lets you do a for loop inside of HTML. So I'm going to do end for. So for pattern in patterns, end for. And pattern will be the key. And so we're going to put pattern right here. So you use these little placeholders here to access a variable and specify it's the value of a variable. So I'm going to do that. And then patterns, and then the key is pattern in each iteration of that loop. So I'm going to do patterns, pattern. And if we do that, actually we only need one of these because it's looping through. It's going to do an option for each one of those candlesticks, right? And so if I do that, you'll see now that we have this nice drop down with all of the different patterns in our dictionary, and I can select them, and I can say engulfing. I click scan, and you see it uses CDL engulfing, which is what the name of the function is inside of TA-Lib. So that's going well so far, right? And so now what are we going to do next? So let's go ahead and get our data set next. So what we're going to do is use yfinance like we did in the past. So I'm going to use yfinance, and let's get some data for this to operate on, right? And so I'm going to do, I'm going to import from yfinance. So I'm going to do I'm going to do import yfinance as yf, right? And so I have that. And then in this snapshot function, so the snapshot function we're going to use to actually take a snapshot of the daily closes of all of the stocks in the S&P 500. And so we can, every day, we could run this at the end of the day automatically, and it will get the latest snapshot of all of our data. And then, we could scan at the end of the day and find our trading ideas, right? And so in our snapshot function, let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is get a list. First of all, we need a list of all of the companies we're interested in. And so we're going to do all the companies in the S&P 500. And since we've done this in the past, we already have a data set of S&P 500 companies, and it's in our GitHub repository under github.com/hackingthemarkets. And if you go to repositories, right, there should be one called datasets. If I do that, you'll see I already have SP 500 companies just like that. So that's our list, and I can click raw, copy that, and I'm going to put this in a file. So I'm going to create a folder, and we're just going to call it datasets. I'm going to rename that datasets, right? And then I'm going to create a new file and call it companies.csv. and paste that in. And you see we have this big list of S&P 500 companies. We have the symbol and we have the company name. And so we can use that on our front end. So now that we have that, how do we read this and get the snapshots that we need? So I'm going to go to app.py, and inside of our snapshot function, we are going to say with open. So we're going to open the file, and then the path to the file is datasets/companies.csv, and we're going to say with as f. And so we're going to get a reference to the file. So we're going to open the file, and then f now has our reference to the contents of the file. And I can say symbols equals f.read. So we're going to read in the contents of the file, and then split lines. So split lines is going to get each of the lines in this file, and then we're going to get all of these into a list, a Python list, right? So if I do that and then print symbols, for instance, let's see what that looks like in our console. So I'm going to do that. And then in our index here, actually let's do snapshot. So I'm going to call snapshot, and then let's look in our console, and you see we have a list of all of these companies and symbol names. All right. So now instead of printing the symbols, I'm going to loop through each of the symbols, and I'm going to use the Y-Finance package here, the Y-Finance package, and there's a download method, and I just pass it the name of a symbol or the ticker symbol and the start and end date. And so instead of printing symbols here, I'm going to do for symbol in symbols and print symbol. Okay, and I'll do that. And see, we just need the symbol. So I'll do symbol.split. And I'm going to split it on a comma here and get the 0th one. So that'll actually be the first one. So actually, I'm going to call this company. I'm going to call this companies. So company in companies. We'll split the companies, right? So we'll print companies.split. And so the symbol is actually going to be the first token if we split on a comma. So I'm going to say symbol equals company split 0. And now let me print just the symbol just to make sure that worked. So I'll do that. For company in companies, company.split. So if I do that, you'll see we have the symbols. And so now I can do yf.download. So data equals yf.download. Okay, and we have the symbol, and we can just say the start date equals 2020-0101, and the end date equals August 1st. And then we could use like the current date as well. We could call a function to do the current date if we want to run the snapshot over and over again. So we're going to do data equals that. And then we can do data.toCSV. So a yf.download actually returns a pandas data frame. And so that'll return it into data. So I'm going to call it data frame or df. And so we can do df.toCSV and just give it the name of a file. And so I'm going to save all of these data sets into a new folder under datasets. So I'm going to create another folder called, let's say, daily. So datasets daily. And then if we want to download other time frames, we can do datasets weekly, hourly, and so forth. So I'm going to do datasets daily. And so I'm going to save it to datasets daily, and then the symbol name. So I'm going to do symbol, or I'm going to do a placeholder, and then I'm going to do dot format, and then we're going to do symbol. And then we're going to put .csv at the end. So datasets daily, and then we're going to substitute the symbol name and then do .csv. If we do that and hit our snapshot method, let's see what happens. Right. So I'm going to hit that, and you'll see, look at my console, all those 100%. So it's actually completing, and you see it's writing CSV files to this daily directory. And so if I open this one, ADBE, for instance, you'll probably see, that's the historical price data for Adobe stock. And we have all the open, high, low, close data from the beginning of the year through the close of July 31st. So once our data set's finished downloading, all we need to do is apply TA-Lib to each of the companies in this list. And so we're going to list all of the CSV files in this directory, And we can load each of those into a data frame, and then we can apply a TA-Lib candlestick pattern function to this data frame. And then once we do that, we just see how it flags the last row in this data frame, and then we'll know whether that candlestick pattern has appeared as of the close of Friday, July 31st. And so let's go ahead and do that. It looks like it's done now. And so I'm going to go back to app.py, and then let's go ahead and start working on our main function here. So instead of hello world, I'm going to call that index, and let's start running through it. So the first thing we need to do is get the name of the candlestick pattern we're looking for. And so when I submit this here, right, and I click scan, it's sent as a query parameter. So it says pattern equals CDL3 outside, so that's passed in the URL. So in Flask, we need to capture that into a variable. So I'm going to do pattern is the name of the variable, and we're going to get some information about the request. So we need to import request from Flask. Okay, so request is an object that has information about the current request, including like the IP address that it came from, any post form variables, the get parameter, query variables, and all that kind of information. So I'm going to do request.args. So I'm going to get all the arguments. So I'm going to do request.args.get, and then I'm going to get the argument called pattern, right? And so I give it that string. And then if it's not present, we give it a default of, let's say, a none, right? And so if pattern, let's just print the pattern, and let's make sure that works. So I'm going to do this. I click it, and then you see we have candle 3 outside in a variable that we can print to the screen. And so now we need to just apply that function to all of the data sets we hear, everything in this directory. So how do we do that? So let's loop through all of the files in this directory. And so in Python, right, we have this OS list directory. And this method will list all of the files in a particular directory, and then we can loop through it. So I'm going to say os.list directory. And to use OS, we need to make sure we import it. So I'm going to do import OS. And I'm going to move my imports on top of these froms here. So I'll import OS at the top. You don't have to do that, but I just, for some reason, I feel like ordering it that way. So I'm going to do import OS, and then I'm going to do OS list directory datasets /daily. And so datasets, or data files, let's call it data files. And let's print our data files just to make sure it works. So we just run it as we go. And you see we have this big list of CSV files, right? And so it's a list. We can loop through it. So we do for data set in data files. We want to open that data set, right? So we're going to say, we're going to use pandas to read a CSV file into a data frame. And so pandas has this read CSV file, right? Or read CSV function, and you just give it the name of a CSV file, and it'll automatically make that into a data frame. And so I'm going to do pandas. And we didn't import pandas, so I need to import pandas. So I'm going to do import pandas as PD. And so then I can do pd.read CSV. And we just got to give it the path to our file. And so we're going to do datasets daily. And then as we're looping through, we just give it the name of the file. And so I'm going to do /format, and then I'm going to format it and give it the dataset file name, right? And I'm going to call this for file name in data files. Okay. And we could put these in a constant as well if you want to clean this up later. Put datasets daily so that we don't repeat that over and over again. So that's it. And then I'm going to do df. So data frame equals, and then we're going to read each of those files. So, and then let's print the df and see if that works. So I'm going to do that. And you see it's printing tons of data frames to our screen. And you see we have data, open, high, low, close, volume. And then we have a series from January 2nd through July 31st. So we're reading all those data frames in. And I'm just going to read them in to separate data frames one by one. It seems fast enough to work. You might be better to load all these into a single file on a single data frame, but it's fine for our purposes. So we're getting a bunch of data frames. We're loading them in a loop. And then the next thing we want to do is apply our candlestick pattern function from TA-Lib. And so we're going to use TA-Lib. So we need to import TA-Lib. So I'm going to import TA-Lib just like that. And we need to run a function, right? So the way we do that, right, in TA-Lib, in the last video, we looked at the pattern recognition functions, and it needs to look something like this, right? Some integer. So result equals TA-Lib dot the name of the pattern function, and then you need to pass it open, high, low, and close. And so we have this data frame here with open, high, low, close. And so now we just pass those columns in, right? So we can do open, df high, df low, and df close, right? So if we do that, we should be able to apply this pattern, like the inside candle pattern here. So I'm going to do that and print the result. Okay. And it looks like we have an exception that I am going to skip temporarily. There might be an error in one of these files. So I'm going to do a try except around here real quick. So I'm just going to let it pass for now. Okay, cool. So you see we're printing a lot of results here. So there's lots of zeros, right? So we didn't find that pattern yet. But if I do like engulfing, for instance, run that, we'll probably see some engulfing patterns in here somewhere. Yeah, so you see this is correctly picking up some engulfing patterns, right? And so what do we do next, right? I'm just testing it out, making sure TA-Lib is able to work on these data frames that we have, right? And I'm applying the engulfing pattern, right? But I want to be able to apply any of these patterns, whichever one is selected, right? So we're passing it in as a pattern here, as a string. And so we have a string and we have the name of the function, but how do we call a function using the name of the function? If we have the name of the function as a string, how do we call that on TA-Lib dynamically, right? So what we're going to do is use a function called getAttribute in Python, right? And if I look that up, what that allows us to do is get the named attribute of an object. And so since all these functions are named attributes on TA-Lib, we can just use getAttribute, and that'll actually return us the function that we need to call based on this. So we can pass it the string, like the name of the function, and that'll get us that function in a variable, and then we can call that function, right? And so let's see how that works real quick. So I'm going to say pattern function equals getAttribute, and so we're going to get an attribute of TA-Lib, and we're going to use this pattern that's a string. And so what this will do is it'll return the pattern function in a variable. And so if CDL3 outside is selected, pattern function will actually be a reference to this CDL3 outside function, and then we can just call it, right? So now instead of TA-Lib.engulfing, I can do pattern function and then pass it open, high, low, and close, and print the results. And now if I do that, I'm going to refresh it, and this is actually using the candle3 outside function, right? And so it's dynamically switching based on the name of the function. So now that we can load each of our data sets into a data frame and apply TA-Lib functions to those data frames, how do we focus on what we're most interested in, right? I want to focus on the present. So I want to focus on the last row here. Like, I don't care that there was a bullish engulfing pattern, in March now, right? I want to make some trades tomorrow, which is Monday, right? And so I want to focus on the most recent day here. So this will be the last candle here. And so I want to filter this down and see the non-zero values. So TA-Lib returns a 0 if the pattern is not detected, and it'll return a non-zero value if the pattern is detected. And so let's try to focus on the last result. So we have our result. And so what I want to do now is say the last candlestick is equal to result dot, And then pandas has a tail function, and that'll return the last last set of rows, right? Similar to the tail function in Unix, will return the last few lines of a file. You can call tail, and it looks like it returns the last 5 values by default, but you can pass it a number. And so I just want the very last candlestick. So I'm going to do .tail1, and then I'm going to do .values. And now if I print last here, and I reload it, you'll see if I scroll down a bit more, you see that little 0 in brackets. So it looks like it returns a list. And so I just want the 0th one. So I'm going to do values 0 since there's only one column in the row. If I do that, you'll see we just get all these zeros. And I'm going to not print the results anymore. And I'm going to refresh it again. And you see we just have zeros and hundreds. And so these ones that have a 100 are going to be the ones that triggered the current candlestick pattern that we have selected. So I'm printing the last candlestick's value, or the last TA-Lib's indicator's value. And let's look at this a little bit more. And so I'm going to say print, and we want the name of the file, for instance. So let's print what file we were on when we scanned for it. So I'm going to say print file name. So I'm going to print contain triggered. Okay, so I'm going to say this file name triggered this particular pattern. So I'm going to say dot format, and let's just find some format, file name, and the pattern. And then I'm going to say if last is not equal to 0, let's do it like that. Now I'll try it again, and you'll see it's printing out on the screen, and you'll see ones that triggered candle outside, right? And if I do, for instance, engulfing, this one's easy to look at, right? And if I scroll down, we can see all the different ones that triggered engulfing. And so if I scroll up, you'll see some values. So I don't know, ticker symbol GPC, looks like it had that -100 there. And so let's go to like TradingView, for instance, or whatever charting platform you want to use. And then if we look at the full feature chart here, let's see if that is the case. Yeah, look at that. So July 31st, I got the daily chart, and clearly there's a bullish candle and then a bearish engulfing candle after it. And so you see we were correctly able to scan the most recent candlestick of all charts in our data set. And so I could look at another one, for instance. Let's see. What's one we recognize? DG. Let's look at DD. All right, DD, DuPont, another bearish engulfing candle. Intel, we discussed that one earlier. Bearish engulfing candle there. And then let's look at a bullish one, TJX. Okay, TJX, see that's a bullish engulfing candle there. So we're correctly scanning for all of our candles, right? So yeah, this looks like it's working. So the last thing we need to do is clean it up a little bit and make our front end look a little bit more useful and nice. And so let's go ahead and go further with this. So what I'm going to do now is get the list of our stocks and companies into a dictionary, because right now on our front end we just have the names of the patterns, but we want a list of stocks. So I'm going to do this as a dictionary. And so what I'm going to do is create a new dictionary called stocks, right? And we're going to open our data set of stocks, and we're going to store those in a dictionary so that we can loop through them on the screen. So we have our companies here, right? And so I'm going to do with open. So let's open our companies list, right? And we'll do data sets, and then we'll do companies.csv as F. And then we're going to read our CSV file. So for row and csv.reader, so I'm going to read this. So I'm going to import the CSV reader, and you can also just read this as a regular file and split it up and so forth. I'm going to use the CSV reader here. And so for row and CSV reader F, we're going to say stocks, and I'm going to use a dictionary. And so I'm going to have the key of the dictionary be the symbol, and then I'm going to point that to another dictionary. And so that value will be a dictionary, and I'll have the company's name in that dictionary, and also whether there's a bullish or bearish pattern. So I'm going to say stocks row 0. So row 0 will be the symbol, and that'll be the key. And I'm going to say that is equal to another dictionary, right? And I'm going to say it's just the, I'm going to give a key of company and then give row 1 as the value. And so if I were to print stocks here, and I'm going to remove any other prints I have. Okay, and refresh that. And let's see, for row in CSV Reader, oh, I just import CSV. All right, and so now if I scroll down, you'll see we have this dictionary, and then the key will be the ticker symbol, and that points to another dictionary with a company name as an attribute and Walmart as the value. And so I'm going to make another key inside of this dictionary that says whether a bullish or bearish pattern has appeared in that particular stock. So what I'm going to do here is, since I'm looping through the file names, and each of these file names contain the stock symbol, I'm going to extract the stock symbol from the file name I'm on. And so I'm going to get this file name and just say symbol equals file name. I'm going to split it on the dot in the file name, right, on the period. And that'll give me a list, and the 0th one will be the actual symbol. So file name split 0 will give me the symbol, right? Okay, so I have a symbol, and then in my dictionary here, so I have my stocks dictionary, and then I have a symbol so that I can look up the key. So what we'll do here, we'll say if last is greater than 0, we know it's a bullish pattern. Else if last is less than 0, we know it's bullish. Otherwise, nothing happened, right? So I got that. And so now I'll say if last is greater than 0, then stocks symbol. So we got the key symbol. And then we'll say pattern equals bullish. Otherwise, we'll say stocks symbol pattern equals bearish. And then otherwise, well, we can just have it be none. So I'll set that equal to none. All right, and look at that. So yeah, so we have some values filled in here, and let's send the stocks to our template by doing stocks equals stocks, and then let's go to our template and let's see what that looks like. So after our form, let's put stocks here, or actually we'll loop through the stocks, right? So we'll do for stock and stocks, and for and stock. All right, so let's do that. I refresh. You see we have all the stock symbols because that's the keys for our dictionary. And so that's our key. And then we just need stocks. Stock will actually be the name of the dictionary that's inside of that key. And so we can just do company like that. Right? And so that'll loop through all our companies. And then we can loop through the patterns as well. So we're going to send the pattern name to our template. So I'm going to do pattern equals pattern. And so the pattern is passed from the URL here, and we captured it in this argument here. So we have a variable called pattern that contains the current pattern, right? So that's passed to our template. And then we're using that as a key here. And then so if I do that, let's see. All right. And since this is a giant blob here, we want to do a little bit better than that. And so we're going to say, we're going to loop through all the stocks. And then since pattern is none when it's not present, we're going to say, we're only going to show the stock when the pattern matches, this candlestick pattern here. So I'm going to say if, so I'm going to do if stocks stock pattern, right? So if it is not none, then That's the only time we're going to print it. And if stock is not none, then we can just print the name of the company, right? And so let's do that. Now if I refresh it, this should just filter down to the ones, and actually we don't even need is not none. We can just do it like that. If it's not false, right? And that should just filter it down. And so I think that worked here. So let's go ahead and look. So you see it says engulfing here, and this dropdown is getting reset. Let's go ahead and default this dropdown to whatever pattern is currently being looked at so that we can see it right here. And so since we have pattern getting passed back to the template, we can do a selected equals selected here to select the default dropdown value. And then when are we gonna select it? We're gonna say if pattern equals, and we're calling it pattern here, so that's a little bit weird. Let's go ahead and rename it a little bit. So I'm gonna call this current pattern, and I'm gonna say current pattern, right? Ooh, a lot of renames there. Oh, actually, I didn't even need to rename it in all those places. So what I'm going to do, instead of calling it pattern here, when we pass it to the template, we're going to call it current pattern, right? So I'm going to do that. And inside the template now, it's going to be called current pattern because in our render template function, we can actually rename it and call it something else in the template. So if pattern equals current pattern, then we can do selected equals selected. And we'll do and if right there. And now if I refresh it, you'll see engulfing pattern is pre-selected. I click scan and nothing happens because I'm still calling it pattern right here. So I'm going to call it if stock current pattern is not null, or it's not none. If it's not false, that means it's like 100 or negative 100. Then I can print it, and it'll print these stocks. And then instead of printing it like this, let's make it easier to read. Let's do some kind of table. So I'm going to do a table wrapped around here. And then for each one of these stocks, we're going to do a new table row. So we'll do new table row. And let's give our table some headings. So I'm going to do a new row, and let's create a couple of headings here. So I'll do headings. And then I'll call one of them symbol, and then I'll call one of them company name, right? And then actually we'll make one for the pattern itself, whether it's bullish or bearish. So I'll just call it signal. And then for each one of these, we're going to make a new row, right? And we'll put the stock name. So we're going to do the stock, company, and then like a bullish or bearish number. So I'm going to do that. So put that in a table cell, put the company name in a table cell, and then also we'll do the pattern, right? Stocks, stock, and then we'll say current pattern, right? And let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to refresh this. And we got a slash. So let's look at our debugging here, line 41. If stocks current pattern. Okay, so it looks like I didn't close that curly brace. Let's see. Look at that. Okay, so now we have all of our symbols, and whether it's a bullish or bearish signal, we have our bearish forward like we showed at the beginning of the video. We have our bearish intel, right? And our bearish booking, and we have a bunch of bullish signals as well. So our screener is currently working. So I can do a different candlestick, and it filters down differently. And I can go back to engulfing, right? And so now let's just finish this up with let's just put some charts. Let's piggyback on another charting site and highlight these bullish and bearish signals here. And so what we'll do at the top, we're going to make CSS classes. And so I'll say a dot bullish is background green and color white. And then for bearish, we'll do background red and color white, just like that. If I do that, then I can use this word bullish and bearish, and I can do TD class equals, so a CSS class. If I do that, you see we have bullish and bearish just like that, and it's highlighted green and red. And then also for our TDs, our TD cells, we can do, let's give it a little bit of padding. Let's say 10 pixels. Yeah, so that makes it a little bit nicer looking there. And let's just throw a chart on there, and then I think we're done. So I was going to using FinViz because I noticed if I type like Intel, for instance, INTC gives me a nice chart like that. And if you copy the image address, you'll notice it follows a certain pattern. So that gives me the image by itself. And so I'm going to copy that pattern and just put it in an image tag. And so let's create a new row for this. And I'm going to give it a call span of 3 since there's 3 cells there. Right. And then instead of just using Intel, I'm going to do image source equals. Right. Do it like that. And instead of Intel, I'll just use whatever symbol I'm on. So I'm going to do stock right there. And if I do that and refresh, and when we do that, you see we have a nice stock chart for each of our engulfing patterns. And if I scroll down, you see that this all works, and we have bullish and bearish and engulfing patterns. We've scanned every stock in the S&P 500. If I want every day, I can just hit that snapshot button. We can put a snapshot button, snapshot all of the latest data sets. We can scan them for all of these patterns. And we, just like that, very easy, easy list of actionable ideas. We can add other indicators from TA-Lib, whatever indicators you want to add from TA-Lib. You can combine these, get certain candlestick patterns. You can use any other TA-Lib functions here. So let's say you want to combine this with volume indicators, like you're interested in on-balance volume, or the AD line, or some of the other statistic functions, momentum indicators, all this stuff. You can put it all here, but yeah, this is it. So I think we've accomplished a lot here. I'm very happy with this. So you see, in not very many lines of code, as promised, well, we got a little over 50 lines here, and a little over 50 lines there. So roughly 100 lines of code, we're able to make a complete web application that scans for candlestick patterns from our book, Japanese Candlestick Charting Techniques. We understand it, we can write the code in Python, we can use TA-Lib, and we can make useful tools for ourselves to come up with trading ideas. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned. I got a lot more on the way. Thanks.